Welcome back to the Fat Loss Academy podcast. I am your host, Josh Trinchini, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about just how quickly you can lose body fat and subsequently how long it takes to gain the fat back. Now, this is important to know because it'll help you set the right expectations along your fat loss journey, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more, in more detail about that in the upcoming episode. But first, in the last episode, we determined the amount of calories that we need to consume each day to be in a calorie deficit. Now, you simply consume this amount of calories for a consistent period of time and you'll begin to lose weight. But how long will it actually take? Well, I'm glad you asked because we can roughly determine that too. See, 1 kilo of body fat is roughly equal to 7,700 calories. It isn't perfect, it's just close enough to give us a rough idea. Body fat itself is actually 87% fat, with the remaining percentage coming from protein and water. So 1 kilo of body fat doesn't equal just fat alone. But anyway, we can just use this 7,700 calories as a rough yardstick. Now, if we know the size of our deficit, and we obviously went over this in the last episode, if we use the same example where we had our maintenance calories as 2,000 calories per day, and we subtract 20% from that to create our deficit, leaving us with a goal of 1,500 calories per day, then we know that the size of our deficit is 2,000 minus 1,500, which equals 500 calories per day. So we are creating a deficit of 500 calories per day. So simply, all I need to do is take that 1 kilo of body fat, so 7,700 calories. Now, take the size of our deficit, which is 500 calories per day, and I divide 7,700 by 500, and that is going to give me 15.4 days. So roughly 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks to lose that 1 kilo of body fat, which is equivalent to roughly 0.06 grams per day or 0.45 kilos per week. So roughly half a kilo per week. Now, before hearing that, be honest with yourself. Did you think that burning less than half a kilo of fat per week is slow? Because most people, I'm assuming, would initially consider that to be slow or potentially even pretty unsuccessful. And this is a big error that I see a lot of people make because this isn't slow at all. In fact, I would actually consider this to be on the faster end of the scale of making progress. Okay? But so many people think this is slow, so immediately they're going into it, they already have the wrong expectations. And what happens when we have the wrong expectations? Usually we give up or we quit or we chop and change what we are doing. Now, I see this all the time. People who are making this amazing progress like this, maybe they are losing, just under half a kilo a week, only to give up or change what they're doing because they were expecting to see something like, maybe losing more than 1 kilo a week or something like that. And, maybe this is because they've seen something on social media, or maybe they've seen those videos of people saying, they've lost 10 kilos in 4 weeks. And I hope that by now we should all know that just how deceiving social media can really be. So we've worked that out, but we also have to take something else into consideration. With that equation, we simply divided 7,700 by 500, but this isn't a perfect example. And why is that? Well, that assumes that you'll burn the same amount each day to have this perfect little deficit of 500 calories every single day. Now, realistically speaking, some days you'll likely burn more calories, some days you'll likely burn less, meaning your fat loss, might be a little bit higher or a little bit lower and so on. And we also have to think, will we actually be eating the exact same amount of calories every single day? Now, some of you are probably really, really strict and maybe you will eat pretty similar calories every single day, but the majority of people are probably going to have a lot of fluctuations in their eating habits. So really, what we used as a deficit of 500 calories each day might actually look a little bit more like, maybe one day it's a deficit of 500 calories, one day it's a 300 calorie deficit, the next day maybe it's a 100 calorie deficit, one day maybe it's a little bit more and it's a 700 calorie deficit. So it might not be this perfect little 500 calories every single day. So that 7,700 divided by the 500, maybe that was being too generous. It might even be a little bit less than that. And that is something that you have to consider. And the key point with all of this here is that we just have to be realistic about everything. And the reason I find this topic so important is because understanding all of this really helps you stick to what you are doing. Okay, when you have a better understanding of what fat loss actually looks like, you'll be more likely to remain consistent to what you are doing. And as I mentioned in previous episodes, this is arguably one of the most important things you can do when it comes to fat loss, which is being consistent. And if you refer back to that first episode where I talked about the DEAR framework, the discipline, education, adherence, accountability, and realistic expectations, well, realistic expectations is one of the key principles, and this is why. If you are going into your fat loss journey and you don't have those realistic expectations in place, then it is likely at some point you are going to give up, change what you're doing, whatever it is. Okay, so that is why I'm doing these episodes, and that's why I'm sort of putting this information out early, is because already just by learning this, you're going to have a much better expectation of what your fat loss journey should look like. Now, what about fat gain? And this is time for some good news, because I imagine some people might be a little bit bummed because maybe they were hoping it would be, their weight loss journey would actually be a little bit quicker than that. But it's pretty similar for fat gain as well, okay? A lot of people think they gain body fat a lot quicker than what they actually do. And there's actually some really good research out there which proves this point. One study in particular, they took 16 male subjects and they fed them 50% more than their maintenance level of calories. So remember, this isn't 50% more above their calorie deficit. This is from your calorie deficit up to your maintenance and then 50% on top of that as well. So if we go back to that previous example where we had a calorie maintenance of 2,000 calories per day, this would be eating roughly 3,000 calories, and they did this for 14 days, okay? And at the end of the study, they gained 1.5 kilos of body fat. Not that bad considering they were eating 1,000 calories plus above their maintenance calories for 14 days straight, okay? So that roughly equals 0.9 kilograms of fat, okay, if we were to divide that out by the 14 days. So again, really not that much considering how much in excess over their maintenance they were eating. So the fat gain was pretty minimal. And there was another study where they had 29 slightly overweight men, and again, they had them eat 40% above their maintenance calories, but this time for 8 weeks, okay? So this ended up being around an extra 12 to 1,500 calories per day on average, and across the 8 weeks, they ended up gaining 4 kilos of body fat, which again, roughly translated to about half a kilo of week, or maybe 70 grams of fat per day. So again, this is quite excessive above their maintenance calories for an extended period of time, and the fat gain wasn't that crazy. So what's the point that I'm trying to make here is that I see a lot of people who maybe on their fat loss journey after, a few good weeks, maybe they have one, day where they really go off the rails. Maybe they binge eat pretty badly, or maybe they have a bit of a big weekend and they overdo their calories by quite a lot. Now, your scales weight is obviously going to jump up quite a bit, and I'll talk about that in a second, but this is just to highlight the fact that everything you've done over that weekend, even if you have had a really big weekend and you've eaten heaps of food and well above your calorie deficit target, you really haven't done that much damage at all. The body fat that you maybe have gained, if any, is very minimal, okay? So just like the losing body fat can take a bit of time and is a bit of a process, it's the exact same for the gaining the body fat too, okay? But what about the scales? So I know a lot of people will say, well, you might be thinking that doesn't make any sense because I've done this in the past where I've been really good and then I've had, maybe one night out where I've gone out and eaten pizza and eaten dessert, and then the next day I see the scale jump up by 1, 2, maybe even 3 kilos. Now, this is a hard thing to understand when it comes to fat loss because it isn't very reflective on the scales initially, especially because the numbers are so subtle when you're losing and gaining weight. but the scales themselves can still fluctuate a great deal. And that's because there's more happening than just fat gain and fat loss. And that is something that is really, really important to understand. And I'm going to talk about this more in upcoming episodes, but I just wanted to drop that into this episode because I think it ties in really well. Because again, as soon as you have that understanding and as soon as you have that knowledge, it's a lot easier to accept it, meaning you are going to be more likely to stay consistent with what you're doing, which means you're going to stick to the process, which means long term, you're going to make the results that you truly desire. So that is a little brief, I guess, sort of summary about how quick weight loss can occur, but how quick weight gain can occur as well. I did keep things pretty brief there, but I hope that just gives you enough of a basic understanding. All right. And already across 3 episodes, we've talked about how fat loss works, how we burn calories, how to actually create a calorie deficit. And then obviously in this episode, how quickly weight loss can occur and how quickly weight gain can occur. Now in the upcoming episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about setting those right expectations and why this is key. And this is sort of one of my favorite topics when it does come to fat loss, because I do think it is really, really important. But that's it for today's episode. I hope that you're able to take something away from that. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. As I said, in the next episode, I'm going to be discussing setting realistic expectations. Obviously, as always, if you know someone who might find this useful, please feel free to share it with them. And if you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to like the video and hit subscribe. Or if you're listening on a podcast app, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating if possible. And as always, if you do have a question about fat loss, feel free to send an email to contact@thefatlossacademy.com.au, and I will catch you all in the next episode.